Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Vinodini Kapoor, teaching in the Faculty of Management in Chandigarh. Today, we are going to discuss about the module Risk Analysis under the paper Management Information Systems. After completing this particular module, students, you will be in a position to understand what is the basic concept of risk associated with IT systems and get an overview of the concept of risk, threat, vulnerability, and countermeasure. You will be able to understand what is the process behind risk analysis and the procedure for carrying risk assessment. We will also categorize different types of risk and understand what's the integration of risk management with the stages of system development life cycle. The Internet and its substantial impact on the growth of electronic commerce, communication, and dissemination of information is obvious. The major impact of computer network is on the business process automation. Routine corporate functions are handled with automated processes that are anchored in databases. Network information systems form the very backbone of enterprises and are used in almost all aspects of business, including payroll, procurement, human resource management, analysis and design of engineering components, sales and marketing. Information systems have improved organizational productivity manifold. However, complete dependence on the information system for critical operations has left organizations vulnerable to anomalies and attacks on networks. All organizations today are exposed to uncertainties, and this may impact the organization in an affirmative or a negative manner. So to support the organization, it is very important for the IT professional to help the management comprehend and manage these uncertainties. Limited resources and an ever-changing landscape of threats and vulnerabilities make mitigating the uncertainties more complex. In this digital era, the organizations rely on automated information system technology to process their information. For better support of their mission, risk management plays a critical role in protecting an organization's information needs. To facilitate this, it is imperative for IT security professionals to have a tool set to assist them in sharing commonly understood view with IT and business managers. This needs to be consistent, repeatable, and cost-effective and reduces risk to a reasonable level. The IT assets are also exposed to the damage or losses, and this involves protecting information stored electronically. Now, protection in this particular context implies data integrity, availability, and confidentiality. There are many types of computer crimes like money theft, damage of software, theft of information, alteration of data, theft of services, and trespassing to minimize losses, and hence lays the inevitable need to involve risk analysis, management, and assessment in the area of information technology. The purpose of risk analysis is to assist managers in making informed decisions about the investments and developing risk management policies. Investment decisions are complicated, and it is important that organizations utilize possible information on risk in order to decide how much resource to invest and allocate in countermeasures. It is imperative for information system risk to be quantified and managed accordingly. Since risk management requires an accurate evaluation as a prerequisite, risk analysis is an indispensable aspect in managing information protection. To provide consulting efficiency and the efficient use, management of data, automated tools must be used in the risk analysis process. Let's now discuss what exactly is the risk analysis all about. This is based on the principal concept of threat, vulnerability, countermeasure, risk, and attack. Now let's try and understand each of the terms that we have stated one by one. We'll start with what is a threat. A threat is a possible danger that might breach security and therefore cause possible harm. A threat has an adverse effect on an organization. It exists whether or not there are any practical ways in which it might be manifested. The threat to information systems are independent from the physical implementation of the information system. The effects considerably vary, affecting the confidentiality or the integrity of data, while others affect the availability of a system. Now, a threat can be caused by an internal, an external, or say both external and internal entities. Internal threat shall occur when someone has authorized access to the network with either an account on the server or physical access to the network. A threat can be internal to the organization. Now, this can be a result of employee action or failure on an organizational process. Now, how does an external threat arise? This is possible from individuals or organizations who are working outside a company. Now, they do not have authorized access to the computer system or network. The most obvious external threats to computer systems and resident data are natural disasters, hurricanes, fires, floods, earthquakes, so on and so forth. External attacks can also occur through connected networks, which can be both wired or wireless, physical intrusions, or kind of a partner network. We will now look at what is vulnerability. It refers to any type of weakness in a computer system or procedures or anything that leaves information security exposed to a threat. Vulnerabilities are about information security and information assurance professionals they are seeking to reduce. Minimizing vulnerabilities provide lesser options for malicious users to gain access to secure information. Computer users and network personnel can protect computer systems from vulnerabilities by keeping software secured patches and updated. These patches can remove flaws or security holes that were found in the initial release. Computer and network personnel should be informed about current vulnerabilities in the software they use and then seek ways to protect against them. Children, let's look at the concept of risk. Now, a risk is something that is existing when a threat and a vulnerability overlap. There is threat to business and a vulnerability must be exploited to realize this threat. To exploit the risk is to realize that a threat called an attack and a person or an agency or an organization who's attempting to exploit that risk is that particular attacker. A computer risk is any event or action that could cause a loss of damage to computer hardware or software or data or information. Common computer security risks include viruses, unauthorized access, and the use of computer systems, hardware and software theft, and information privacy and system failure. Okay, students, let's now come to the concept of what is a countermeasure. A countermeasure reduces exposure by reducing the probability of the attack or the vulnerability. Business losses that are associated with a threat or losses result from a successful attack. Now, depending on the nature of the risk, an organization may choose from a variety of countermeasures. A risk can be shifted by applying a countermeasure to the risk itself, which moves all or part of the exposure to any third party involving no change in business or the technology models. The annual exposure is reduced because a countermeasure is applied to the vulnerability and it reduces frequency of occurrence. Risk avoidance, where the countermeasure is applied to the threat, reduces the impact of the threat. A countermeasure involves change to the business model, but no change in the technology model. Children, let's now understand what is the process of risk analysis. As information technology usage spreads, dependence on the information system, threats to access, and vulnerability risks all have increased. And this leaves the organizations exposed to information leakage, attacks on system security. A risk analysis process evaluates risk of exposure to leakage and attack and calculates this particular degree of risk. Now, the ultimate objective of the risk analysis process is to consider what is the threat to the information system and assess what is the vulnerability of the information system and its asset value, to analyze and evaluate the asset risk level and provide countermeasures for removing, accepting, or avoiding risk, and finally, build a safer environment for information system to sustain. The process of risk analysis includes identification and quantifying uncertainties, estimating the particular impact, and building a risk analysis model that expresses these elements in quantitative form. Firstly, we identify and quantify the uncertainty. Now, the goal here is to identify each particular source of uncertainty and then quantifying its magnitude. We may not be able to predict what is the number of people shopping at a store each day, but yes, we can examine what is the past data for frequency of days that people have shopped, and this is to estimate what is the distribution of shoppers on future days. Secondly, compute the impact of the uncertainty. Now, this step is responsible for computing the impact of uncertainty on the outcome. In other words, what we try to calculate here is the output or outcomes for any input. Thirdly, we complete a risk analysis model. Now, this model has inputs which are certain variables, random variables, assumptions, or simply inputs. For any given set of input values, the model calculates output. A risk analysis model allows us to think in ranges because inputs are uncertain, they may take on different values. The outputs are uncertain and may take further range of values. We explore the model with simulation. For this, we can use softwares that are available, such as the Frontline Risk Solver for a Monte Carlo simulation. This performs thousands of experiments or trials. The first run of a simulation trial can often yield surprising results when there are several different sources of uncertainty that interact to produce an outcome. We carry an analysis of the model results that we have obtained. Simulation may yield many possible values of outcomes, and it is essential to analyze the results. It can be very useful to create charts to visualize the results, like the frequency chart or the cumulative frequency chart. A more powerful tool here is to carry out sensitivity analysis that we have studied before in this particular section of management information systems, which can identify to help uncertain inputs with the biggest impact on the key outcome. Using softwares, we can run multiple simulations, choosing different value on each simulation. Lastly, we make decisions to better manage the risk. Risk analysis helps us to determine what are the right steps to take or avoid or mitigate the risk. We can compare risk and return on different projects and then diversify our position so that no single risk can do too much of harm. Risk management and risk assessment. Students, now let us look at these particular concepts and what they explain to us. So, as we have discussed, risk is the net negative impact of vulnerability, that is, considering both probability and the impact of occurrence. Risk management is the process of identifying risk, assessing risk, and then taking steps to reduce it to an acceptable level. Risk management and risk assessment are most important parts of information security management. Risk management will involve the analysis, the planning, the implementation, control, and monitoring of implemented measurements, and risk assessment. It consists of several processes like the risk identification, the relevant risk analysis, and the risk evaluation. First and foremost, students, we will discuss what is the identification of risk. So what we do here is that we create a comprehensive list of events that could say prevent or degrade or delay the achievement of a particular business objective that we have in mind. The comprehensive risk identification is a very crucial step because risk that is not identified at this particular stage may even not be included in the risk analysis phase. So in order to manage that particular risk, potential threats to the information system need to be identified. This is achieved by defining the risk scenario, which is a method for determining if any particular risk exists that could adversely affect the confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability of the information system and the business objective that it intends to explain. They generally consist of a threat that exploits a vulnerability and results in an undesirable outcome. Now, the approach can ensure that all possible threats to the information system are considered and ensure that only those are applicable that are actually assessed. The following techniques can be employed to ensure that comprehensive list of relevant risks are identified. There are people with appropriate knowledge and should be involved in the identification of the risk analysis process. Discussions should include the business owner and the subject matter experts who will provide their particular expertise and up-to-date information during the process. It is also very, very beneficial to have group discussions and workshops to facilitate the identification and the discussion of the risk that may affect business objectives. Children, the main aim here is to make a decision whether a system is acceptable and what measures will provide its accessibility. For every organization using information technology, the business process is very significant to conduct the risk assessment. Threats and vulnerabilities that are present in the identification, the analysis, and the evaluation enable to evaluate the risk impact and proposing suitable measures and controls for its mitigation to an acceptable level. We now look at what is the relevant risk analysis. At this particular stage, the managing entity tries to prevent the effect of already existing or future factors, and proposes solutions that are helping to eliminate adverse effects and enabling to take advantage of the positive effects. Part of the risk assessment process is a decision making process and is based on risk analysis. So, after having considered the additional factors like economic, technical, social, political, and other factors, the managers of risk management develop and analyze and compare what are the potential preventive and regulatory measures and select those that minimize the existing risk. On one hand, qualitative methods are based on the description of the seriousness of a potential impact and on the probability that a given event will occur, where the impact level is usually determined by qualified estimation and the method of structured interviews like the Delphi method. Now, this is based on a managed contact between the experts of the assessment group and the representatives of the assessed subject. Quality methods are simply and faster but are more subjective and can be sufficiently corrected by including the experienced, highly qualified experts. The advantage of this particular method is that it is less source and more time demanding and takes into consideration the specifics of an assess system, the administrator, the environment users, etc. The Delphi method is very well suited for analyzing risks, especially when it determines what can happen and under what particular conditions. A combination of both methods can be implemented here, where we assess risks, threats, probabilities, impacts by using a qualitative method and then using a quantitative effort. Now, this approach is based on the ISO certifications, and in this case, we start from seriousness of the threat impact to the asset in the project or on the project itself from the probability of the threat occurrence. We must take into consideration that this particular relationship depends on many factors and that can reflect in both the actual risk of the project and the impact of the system parameters. Students, we will now discuss the concept of risk evaluation. Now, once risk analysis has been completed, the residual risk can be evaluated against the risk tolerance level. It assists the business owner in making decisions on what risks treatment is required and how they should be prioritized to implement the risk response. The residual risks are assessed between 1 and 3 on the rating scale and are generally considered to be present an acceptable level of risk to the business and do not require further evaluation. However, risk is rarely static. They should be added to the agency's risk register so that they can be monitored and assessed on a regular basis to ensure the likelihood and the impact do not change. The residual risks are evaluated as between 4 and 25 on the rating scale and need to be evaluated and prioritized. Higher the risk rating, higher is the priority. However, there may be 2 or more risks with the same rating. If it is not clear which risk has a higher priority, the information protecting priority defined in the business context should be used to determine priority for implementation of additional controls. We will now come to how classification of risk can be done. This is based on the potential financial or other impact of a loss. That risk can be grouped as, firstly, critical risk. Now, this implies whose potential losses will sum up to a company's bankruptcy or dissolution or political destabilization a person's bodily harm, or say even death. Example, a failed project can threaten or disable basic state functions like the payment of benefits, registration of motor vehicles, and in case of private entities, the production shutdown and default on the contractual obligations. Major risk. Now, this is a risk or threat whose damage will cause potential loss and do not lead to bankruptcy but remain in operation. A company will have to, say, borrow funds or adopt another measure that will exceed the regular operation, like to sell a part of the assets, to remove authorized persons, or to carry a media campaign to initiate legal steps. These will result in higher expenses or the delay of a project. Regular risk. It is very, very usual in the given area of activities and result in the potential losses to be converted with current assets without causing inadequate financial pressure. Now, a risk whose consequences are not threatening a project can continue without major cost and time losses. Now, students, let us now try and understand how we can determine the level of risk of a given threat with respect to a particular assigned asset. We can express the level of risk, say defined by R, as a function of two particular variables, where the first variable is the impact of a materialized threat and it is in connection to the asset value. We symbolize is by the letter A, and then the probability of the threat materialization, which is in connection to the vulnerability of the project or the entire project, and this is symbolized as H. So we have the level of risk as a function of the materialized threat and the probability of that particular threat. Now, higher the risk level for the threat, the more effective measures need to be implemented to eliminate the risk or reduce this particular risk to an acceptable level. To assess the level of individual risk, which comprises of the inherent, the residual, and the target risk, we also use the total risk matrix. When analyzing risk and before adopting measures to eliminate risk, we assess inherent risk without taking into consideration the already existing or the considered measures. Now, after we have implemented the measures, we again assess level of risk while including the level of the residual risk, which is after these particular measures have been implemented, or the level of the target risk. What is the target risk? It is requested by the analysis recipient. The target risk here is based on the strategic managerial decision where level of a given risk is determined and fully accepted. Now, it does not necessarily mean the zero risk, especially if achieving zero risk will mean inadequate expenses or the lower functioning of a system. We will now discuss the integration of risk management with the system development lifecycle. Now, students, we have discussed and understood before that the SDLC cycle has 5 phases. The first being the initiation phase, followed by development, the implementation, operation, and the maintenance, and lastly, the disposal phase. The risk management methodology is the same regardless of which particular stage of the SDLC phase you are in and for which the assessment is being conducted. Now, this is because risk management is an iterative process that can be performed during each of the phases of SDLC. Okay, let's first come to the initiation stage. So, in this phase, the purpose and the scope of the information system is formulated. The identified risks here are used to support the development of the system requirement, including the security requirement and a security concept of operation. Secondly, development. The information system is designed, programmed, and developed. The risk identification during this particular phase can be used to support the security analysis of the IT system and may lead to architecture and design trade-offs during the system development. The third stage of the SDLC cycle
The implementation stage, the system security features must be configured, verified, tested, and enabled. The risk management process supports the assessment of the system implementation against its requirements and within its modeled operational environment. The decisions regarding risk identified should be made prior to the system operation. The fourth stage of the SDLC cycle is the maintenance stage. The system performs its functions here. The system is modified on an ongoing basis through addition of hardware or software and changes to the organizational policies, procedures, and processes. Risk management activities are performed for periodic system reauthorization or whenever a major change is made to the IT system in the operational and the production environment. Lastly, the last stage of the SDLC cycle is the disposal stage. This involves disposition of information, hardware, and software. Activities may include moving, archiving, discarding, or even destroying the information and then sanitizing the hardware and the software. Risk management activities are performed for system components that will be disposed or replaced to ensure that the software and the hardware are properly disposed of and the residual data is appropriately handled and the system migration is conducted in a secure and a systematic manner.
Okay, students, we'll now summarize what we have learned in this particular module. So, risk is the potential harm that may arise from some current process or some future event. It's a function of the likelihood of a given threat exercising a particular potential vulnerability and the resulting impact of the adverse event on that organization. Risk in context of information systems can be stated as the net mission impact that considers probability that a particular threat source will exercise or trigger or intentionally exploit particular information system vulnerability and the resulting impact if this should occur. IT-related risk arise from legal liability or loss due to the unauthorized disclosure, the modification or the destruction of information. Unintentional errors and omissions, disruptions due to natural or man-made disasters can again pose risks. The other factors include failure to exercise diligence in the implementation or the operation of the IT system. So, successful and effective risk management is the basis for success and effectiveness of IT security. Due to the reality of limited resources and nearly limited threats, a reasonable decision must be made concerning allocation of resources. Risk management allows organizations to protect information and business process commensurate with their particular value. Successful and effective risk management is the very basis for successful and effective IT security. Establishing and utilizing an effective high-quality risk management process and basing information security activities on the process will lead to an effective information security program in the organization. Thank you.